Tes. Okay, good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thanks to all of you who come to our FEM talk. That actually this is a regular event when we had the opportunity to invite or to invite from college abroad as well as from a national college. And today's we are lucky that Professor Kis-Katost from Göttingen University and Dr. Elias would like to share and present the interesting topic related to the current research of our guest. And the topic is about political deforestation cycle in Indonesia. Welcome to Professor Kis-Katost and then Elias. Actually, Professor Kis-Katost just arrived last night and early in the morning already been here. We had opportunity looking around our campus, the faculty, and this is actually part of a recent collaboration between IBB and German under CRC, and we would like also to continue for the next phase of the study. And Professor Kis-Katost actually had many experience related to Indonesia because some of students conducting thesis and dissertation on Indonesian topic. So Indonesia for Professor Kis-Katost is not a new country, but he knows Indonesia. She knows Indonesian very well. And now I would like to give time to both of you to present political deforestation cycle in Indonesia. Time is yours.
Terima kasih. Selamat pagi. University of Bogor. My colleague Elias is there, as Hamilton said, and so I'm going to present you joint work, which is done in the Collaborative Research Center, where Pertanian is also part of it. So we have a large collaborative group. Could you please switch to? I will push the button. Okay, so we have a large group. It's research that is supported by the German Science Foundation. It's called on the ecological and socio-economic functions of tropical lowland transformation, or lowland rainforest transformation systems. It's basically looking at Jambi province in Sumatra, and is looking at the change in land use on Jambi province of Sumatra. And we joined this project recently and just started working on it. I have worked, and Elias as well, we have worked on deforestation in the Brazilian context, so in Brazil. And now we are looking at deforestation in Indonesia. Before that, I have worked a lot on Indonesian labor market, poverty, female labor force participation, trade liberalization, the effects of trade, but also public finance, so fiscal spending. And now we are looking at deforestation. In this project, we are trying to understand which regions, it's basically regional economics, we are trying to understand which regions are involved in or losing forest or making economic decisions such that forest is being lost and land use is being switched from forest to especially agricultural activity. So what, and you see already in the title, it is about also politics, so about the role of politics and especially local politics. So how is deforestation related to local politics and change and decisions that local politicians may be making or incentives that they are facing. So what we are trying to understand, so this is basically what we are looking at, that's how forests look like in 2000. So that was the forest cover in Indonesia in 2000.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So that was a forest cover in Indonesia in 2000. Is it better now? Okay, fine, sorry. So it's a forest cover in Indonesia in 2000, and this is the forest cover in 2016. So basically what we are trying to understand is the changes from 2000 to 2016, and which regions were most affected by it, or which regions were at the forefront of converting forests into other land use. Mostly it's going to be agricultural land use. There you see in red, again, it's basically those cells where forest has been converted from rainforest to other uses. And you see already it's going to be a story that takes place on Sumatra and on Kalimantan. And we are going to look at the different kabupaten kota, so the different districts, and we are going to analyze how these changes in deforestation over time, how they are related with economic incentives and also with political incentives. So what we are trying to understand is basically what is the role of economy, and especially for us, economy is here agriculture, so agricultural incentives, and what is the role of political incentives and whether they go together or what is their interplay. So that's what we are trying to understand. And what we are going to look at is basically yearly variation in changes in forest. So how much forest is being deforested on a yearly basis from one year to the other, and whether this is somehow linked to market forces. So market forces for us are going to be prices, final goods prices, price variation in agricultural goods, agricultural commodities that are changing the profitability of agricultural production. And additionally, we are going to look at political incentives and compare these two. So if you look at what was happening over time in Indonesia, the first graph shows you the newly deforested yearly area, so the size of deforestation on a yearly basis for the country as a total. So there you see an increasing trend in deforestation over time, and you also see quite a bit of variation from year to year. So in some years there was more, in other years there was less deforestation. And at the same time, there was also quite a bit of variation in agricultural incentives. So prices were, in Indonesian rupiah, world market prices for main commodities, which would be palm oil, rubber, but also other important commodities from the Indonesian perspective, were changing over time. And when the economic idea behind it is that when prices are increasing and when prices are higher than before, there is an additional interest, additional incentive to convert land from forest to some agricultural activity, and especially to start plant those products or those crops that are relatively improving in price as compared to the others. And so that's the incentive we are going to look at. What additionally happened in Indonesia, and you know very well, was a whole decentralization process. What this figure shows you is basically the local elections that were taking place from year to year in different Indonesian districts. So that's kabupaten kota level. These are the years in which local bupatis were up for re-election or the electoral incentives were playing out. And what is very interesting from a global perspective in Indonesia is that the elections of bupatis do not happen at the same time, right? but they happen from year to year. In certain years, it's some districts, in other years, it's other districts. So by that, different districts are going to face political incentives at a different time. So there are going to be Kabupaten and Kota that are in their electoral, where politicians are running for the election, whereas their neighbors do not have electoral incentives at all. And so the idea is, behind it is that when you are facing re-election, that's especially the time when politicians are trying to collect favors, or that they're trying to give favors to the local economic players in order to get re-elected, in order to improve their likelihood of getting into office. And by that, that's something that we know very well from the literature, is that especially before elections, around the world, not only in Indonesia, but around the world, before elections, local politicians are going to try to influence their voters. And so by that, we are going to look at different Indonesian districts and the timing of these elections that's going to change over time, and are trying to identify whether before elections there is more of deforestation happening in those districts where politicians are facing re-election. So by that, how could this be? They could be giving out licenses, they could be licenses to concessions, they could try to allow or to foster more agricultural and economic activities, especially in their re-election day. And if this is happening, then what we would observe is that in those Kabupaten quotas that are where politicians are facing re-election, there is something different happening. So from the literature, we actually know quite a lot already. So there have been a lot of studies already written on how the electoral cycle works out in Indonesia, what are the incentives, or how are economic incentives affecting deforestation. So here I just listed a couple of papers. There's much more on this, but I'm just going to refer to a few papers on this. First of all, there is a very well-known paper by Burgess and Quoters looking at exactly this deforestation cycle that we are also analyzing. So looking at deforestation in different parts of Indonesia and linking it to when do elections happen. And from this paper, we already know that, especially in the year before elections, Indonesian districts experience more deforestation. And what they find is that this is, for instance, also interacting with the ability of local districts to access special funds, especially they're looking at oil revenues. So they find that there is a substitution between whether you are generating oil revenues or whether you are going to deforest. These are two different things that a local politician can. So if you have oil revenues, you are going to deforest less. If you don't have oil revenues, you are going to deforest more before the election. And we are going to look at the same process, but now link this likelihood of re-election, or the timing of elections, with agricultural incentives. So it's not only, politicians do not only have access to oil, but potentially also agriculture, and agriculture production is driving decisions to convert land into, from forest into something else, into agricultural land. There are additional papers that are looking at the political economy, and there is one paper by Elias Cisneros and co-authors that is looking at ethnic heterogeneity. So especially they're looking at the pemekaran, so the splitting up of districts, and finding that ethnic heterogeneity also has a relationship with deforestation. So ethnically more homogeneous districts deforest less. And the idea behind it is that if you have many different groups who are whose interests have to be fulfilled, then it's going to lead to an overuse of a resource like a natural resource like the forest. And we have worked with Elias together, so Cisneros, it's Elias' name on the third paper. We were looking at deforestation in the Brazilian context, so in Brazil, and the incentives that politicians in Brazil face, local politicians in Brazil face when when they are being audited from the center. So when there are public audits, when local politicians are taken, or there's additional scrutiny, and the fiscal books of localities, fiscal decisions of localities are being audited. At those times, we find that deforestation may be increasing. So when local politicians are forced to be less corrupt in terms of the use of public funds, they may find a different way to be corrupt by allowing for more deforestation. And we are working on that project still. So that's one part of it. So what this literature shows us is that politics does matter a lot. And politicians matter a lot, and local politicians matter, and their incentives matter. And so that's something that we are bringing to this study as well. Another strand of the literature shows that it's also economic incentives that matter a lot. So there are a lot of papers looking at agricultural prices and variation in agricultural prices, and how this variation in agricultural prices is linked to the decision to deforest areas. And again, as I said before, the idea behind it is that when prices are rising for certain commodities, then in those regions where these commodities can very well be produced or very well be grown, crops that can be grown, in those regions there is going to be more deforestation, as when these crops are relatively less lucrative in production. So there is a bit of evidence on the role of palm oil in Indonesia, and we are also going to look at palm oil, but also on other crops. But also sugarcane in Brazil, or soybean in Brazil, and we have also done some analysis. I have also worked on this, looking at variation in soybean and meat prices in Brazil and how it is linked to deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. And then there's a large literature that is looking at the further policy instruments that matter. So how does deforestation take place? Who is making the decisions, and what types of decisions are being made? So it's about concessions, it's about decisions on natural protected areas, it's decisions about agricultural credit, and so on. And so there is really a large literature on this, and that's where we would like to continue with this project, and also to work with Panunung with it, on it, in order to understand how these different types of policy decisions shaping land use change and shaping deforestation. So after having said this much on Indonesia, so what I'm going to show you today, or like the story, the contribution of the story, is basically to look at how these political incentives interact with market incentives. So how political incentives, re-election incentives, and the elections coming up in Indonesian districts, how this interacts with market incentives to produce certain crops, and how these two are jointly shaping deforestation. And what we plan to do in future work is to understand better what types of policies are being made. So is it all legal deforestation? Is it concession-based? Or is it also partly driven by corruption and so on? Great, thank you. This was a good move. Okay, so in order to understand this, we are going to use data. So we are going to use observational data, and so what type of data do we need? We are going to need data on deforestation. Nicely, it exists already in well-usable format. It's based on satellite data, and I'm going to show you more precisely how. We are going to need economic incentives, variation in economic incentives, and for that we are going to look at agricultural prices. And agricultural prices vary on the world market, but not each Indonesian region is similarly affected by them. So our idea behind it is that palm oil prices, for instance, are going to have the largest effect there where palm oil can be well produced. So where soil is very suitable, where the local economic conditions are suitable for palm oil production. So palm oil is going to drive deforestation only in places where palm oil can actually be grown, well, palm trees can be planted and grown. And it's not going to drive deforestation in places where that's not happening. The same also with other crops. For that, we need price variation, but we also need suitability. So we have to know in which district what types of crops can be grown, and how large is the productivity of different parts of Indonesia. And the third thing we need to know is information on local political process. So we have to know when do elections happen, and how is the timing of, because we want to link the timing of elections to all these outcomes. So first of all, deforestation. That's basically based on the data that I've shown you at the beginning. So the map with the red dots, that was data by Hansen and Coulters on, based on satellite imagery. And this is data that is based on a 30-meter resolution satellite images, showing how does forest cover change from year to year. You have to first determine what is forest, because if you look at satellite maps, you just see color, right? So you see whether it's something is green or yellow or gray, whether it's an industrial area, city, or if it's greenish, even then, it could be forest, or it could be some other vegetation. In order to define something as forest, we use the definition that is very often used in the literature, that at least 30% of such a geographic cell has to be filled by trees. So this canopy density, there is a threshold, and so at least 30% of a cell, if it is filled by trees, it's defined still as forest. Whereas if it's lower, then it's most likely already just a couple of trees standing and some other vegetation, although it is green. And then what we are going to measure is the yearly change in the forest. So it's a yearly forest loss, and we are going to measure it at the level of districts or regencies, Kabupaten and Kotas. So what you see on the map is basically the aggregated information from those red dots from the beginning. Now it's aggregated at the level of districts. So you see, again, the very dark red districts are the districts where the most deforestation was happening. So it's still Kalimantan and Sumatra, but now it shows you at the administrative level, so at the level of the administrative units, which ones are the ones that faced the most forest. The second piece of information that we need is about profitability of different economic activities. So for that, we have to look at how well different crops can be produced in different regions of Indonesia. And the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, provides maps globally on the profitability of different crops. So what you see here is, for instance, the relative suitability of local soils to produce palm oil, to grow palm trees. And you see that there is a large variation. So the dark green parts are the ones where palm trees grow the best, so that are the best suited for palm oil production. We are going to use the variation in space, the geographic variation in this productivity, based on these soil conditions. We are going to use it to come up with a measure which district is the most likely to actually engage in palm tree production after deforestation is going to happen. So basically, what we do, we are taking these maps on suitability. That's only for palm oil, but we are going to look at different major crops that are relevant in Indonesia, and we are transforming these maps into something that is, again, district-based. So there you see there are some districts that are dark green and some that are very pale. The dark green ones are the ones where palm oil can be very cheaply and very well grown, whereas the white ones are the ones that are not suitable because of their altitude, because of their geoclimatic conditions, because of the soil that are the least suitable for palm oil production. That's the cross-sectional variation. So that's the spatial variation in how productive each region in Indonesia could be when producing palm oil. But there's, of course, a second dimension of variation, and this is the time variation. Because at sometimes, I've shown you the picture that prices were going up and down. So at sometimes, it seemed like palm oil production is improved, not production, but prices are improving. Global market prices, what Indonesian producers can get on the global market is increasing, and by that, profitability is potentially increasing. And so we are going to use this variation in prices. We are going to standardize it, so we are going to measure it in a standardized form, whether prices are improving as compared to what was going on over the last time period of 5 to 10 years. And we are going to look at how are prices right now. Is the market paying much more now for a certain crop, and saying, okay, how does this affect a location? And the location, and the idea behind it, again, the location that is going to be most affected by these incentives is the one that can grow palm oil the best. So the locations that are very green here are the ones that are going to be responding the strongest to price variation. And so what we are doing, we are taking variation in prices, a standardized variation in prices, multiplying, interacting it with this local suitability distribution, and that's going to be our measure of price incentives or economic incentives. And what we are going to do is to do econometrics based on this. So what we are going to do is to look, to run regressions and to estimate the yearly value of newly deforested area. So how many hectares of area get lost in a given year. There you see on the left-hand side, DIT, that's deforestation in a district I. Subscript I stands for Kabupaten and Kota, and T stands for Tahun. This stands for year. It's so basically the time. So you look at the yearly variation in newly deforested area, and you are regressing it, you are relating it statistically or econometrically to different factors that could be driving it. The first factor is EIT plus 1, elections. When elections are going to happen in next year, that's T plus 1, so the year after this one, then politicians are facing especially strong incentives to actually cater to their constituency and to do, so to provide benefits to certain economic players to finance their re-election bid, or to convince people shortly before elections that they are actually providing them economic benefits. And so we are going to measure this timing of elections, EIT plus 1. That's going to be the first thing. The second thing is going to be that we are measuring this price variation. So PIT is this price for different agricultural crops. So for instance, this variation of palm oil prices in Indonesian rupiah, standardized, multiplied with its suitability. So it's basically something like a measure of economic incentives, how strongly are price incentives potentially driving deforestation, how strongly are they linked to this deforestation. And additionally, what we are going to do, on the top of that, to multiply these two variables, so to interact these two variables, so to look at whether price variation times election matters. If this matters, what does it mean econometrically, is that prices have a special effect before elections. So prices always matter. Let's say it could be, if we find it empirically. So prices mean economic incentives. Economic incentives may be driving deforestation, but economic incentives may be especially important just before elections. And if we find this, it would be basically here in this third part, is that before elections, prices have a larger effect. That's what we are looking for. Whether before elections, districts respond stronger to price variation in terms of their deforestation outcomes. That's what we are testing for. That's basically at the main center of our study. And I'm going to show you exactly how these coefficients, how these beta coefficients look like. We do control for a couple of things. So that's the x, that's the vector of x. So we are controlling for some additional processes going on. Especially what we are controlling for is the district splitting process, so the pemekaran process. So we are controlling for, we know in which years are districts splitting, and some districts are becoming mothers, so losing children, others are becoming children, so newly formed districts with a new administration, and we are just controlling for in how many years' time is this going to happen to a district, and then is a district 1 year past that the child left, 2 years past, 3 years past, or is a district 1 year after its new formation, and so on. So we are just controlling for this because we want to pick up variation which is due to this whole splitting process. And this whole splitting process, of course, follows, again, economic incentives. You know that historically, districts were splitting if they had if part of the district have expected to benefit from such a split. So if they had a very large ethnic heterogeneity, or if they had a lot of natural resources, then part of the districts were splitting from the mother district, and new districts were formed. Before, it has been frozen for already a couple of times. So by now, the number of districts in Indonesia is sort of stable. And what we are additionally controlling for, that's the last part, or two last parts of it, is differential trends. So basically how changes over time in deforestation, how they are linked to some initial conditions. So especially, we are looking at forest size at the very beginning. So how much forest was there at the very beginning, and saying those districts that had a lot of forest, in those deforestation will be developing completely differently from those districts that had very little forest at the beginning. Again, we are just controlling for this, so we are getting out this additional effect. We are cleaning our estimates of different trends that districts may be facing. And one difference is initial forest, and the other difference is how suitable a district is for production, for growing certain crops. So again, these are just controls. What we are really interested in is the interaction between incentives before elections and prices. And what we are, at the very end of these equations, what you also see, lambda I is a district fixed effect. So by that, we are taking care of all the spatial variation across districts. And some districts are going to experience, on average, much more deforestation than others. That's, again, something we are taking out of the picture. So all this time invariant differences across districts, some of them are going to deforest a lot. On Java, you are going to see deforestation almost nothing. That's something that is taken out by that. Plus, we have year effects. So each year, there is a different propensity to experience deforestation in Indonesia, also because of the weather, also because of the average conditions, macroeconomic conditions, and we are taking care of that as well. And I'm going to show you results that are based on not all districts, but those districts that had at least 40% of their area covered by forest. So by that, Bogor is most likely not part of this, or it doesn't be co-partner, but not part of this, because this is so basically this is excluding large parts of Java because of the highly industrialized or highly agricultural and non-forest areas. But I'm also going to show you additional results on Indonesia as a whole. So after this, by now I'm only going to show you pictures. So these pictures show you basically coefficients, and this first one is showing you coefficients on prices. So basically what you see on the picture is going to be how strongly does deforestation respond to price variation. And all these coefficients are coming from different econometric models, so from different regressions. And what we did is to list these different crops in decreasing importance. So at the very top, you see palm oil. And after that, you see rubber, and then maize, cassava, groundnut, sugarcane, coconut, coffee. So as you go down, the crops are playing smaller and smaller role in the aggregate economic activity of Indonesia. So all of them are relevant, but palm oil brings much more in terms of GDP than banana does. And so we listed these crops in their, by decreasing importance. And what you see here are always the dots are the estimated coefficients, and the blue lines around them are confidence intervals. So basically, they show you how secure we are about this point estimate. So if you have a very long blue line, a very wide confidence interval, it shows you that we are very insecure. We cannot very well estimate this point, but actually there is a very wide range in which this effect could lie. And the important thing for us is whether this blue line is crossing the zero. Because if it is crossing the zero, then we cannot be sure that the effect is not zero. At least these are 90% confidence intervals, so we cannot be sure at the 90% level that it's not zero. So we are going to interpret only those point estimates, only those effects that are clearly above or clearly below zero, whereas if zero is within the band, then we don't know, it could also be a no effect. And what you see from this is basically already visually, it gives you a very clear picture, I hope. You see that almost all of these coefficients are above zero. So basically what does it tell you? When prices go up on those crops, then those districts are going to deforest more that are most suitable for this type of production. So in a sense, palm oil price increases are going to be linked to more deforestation in those districts that are the best, potentially the best palm oil producers, given just their geophysical, geoclimatic conditions. The same thing for rubber, much larger estimates for maize, and so on. What you also see, there is something negative here for cacao, but this is very, very down the line. So at the very beginning, all the top crops are basically positively linked to deforestation. So when prices are rising, we see more deforestation in those districts that are the best suited for that production. And in itself, it's something that you would expect from economics. That's exactly how incentives should work in the very short run. So when agricultural producers are updating their expectations and are thinking about whether to expand and whether to or whether to expand areas into new or change land use from forest and expand to agricultural areas, then price variation and the expected profitability should make a difference. The second step is what happens around elections. So what you see here now are coefficients on elections. So what is happening before the years of elections, and now you see it's much more imprecisely estimated. So we have very wide rule confidence intervals. And what you see here is, horizontally is the timing of elections. So in P, that's the year in which a Kabupaten quota is experiencing an election year. Not national, but again, local elections for the Bupatis and Valikotas. So it's mayoral elections. And what you see, there has been an electoral reform. So decentralization, as you know, proceeded in different steps. And from 2004, starting in 2004, Bupatis, Valikotas became directly elected. Before that, they were elected by the local DPRDs. So they were elected indirectly by the local parliaments. After that, they are elected by the population. So right now, you are casting your vote for the local mayor. Before that, that was the local parliament that was doing that. How does it change incentives for a politician if the politician has to convince not other local politicians, but actually the local population? It may actually increase his incentives to give out short-term favors to the local population. And that's also something we have worked with it with a different colleague of mine before on these incentives before Indonesian elections with Bambang Sohanoko Siakrir. And we find that local municipalities are spending much more on administration, and especially on administrative items that are not otherwise accounted for. So this other category is increasing before elections, before direct elections. So before direct elections, politicians seem to spend more on items that we don't know exactly what they are. So it suggests that it's potentially something politically related and politically motivated. And what you see here now is not much. So in this, on average, you see none of these effects are significant for this sample, but you also see that indirect elections are very imprecisely estimated, whereas the direct elections have a bit smaller confidence intervals. And if something, there seems to be, if something is happening, then actually it could be happening just the year before elections. So if we are now running this regression, you have a question? No, sorry. If we are running this regression and just looking at what happens before elections, so just in this year, then actually this difference is significant. So just before the elections, there is actually more deforestation on average in Indonesian districts than in all the other years. And now comes actually the result that we are most interested in. So this is the interaction. This is whether before elections prices matter more. And you see that there are two stories in here. One of them is that before indirect elections, we don't see anything. The indirect elections are the elections, again, when DPRD, so the local parliaments, are electing mayors. The direct elections, when the mayor is being elected directly by the population, so this is the later years after 2004, you see that the interaction with prices does matter exactly in the year before elections. So exactly as we expected, political incentives when mayors are running for office matter jointly with economic incentives. So before elections, economy matters more. So before elections, those districts that are most suitable for palm oil production, and these are coefficients on palm oil, are the ones that experience the largest increases in deforestation. So by that, this is not showing directly what is happening. So you don't see directly what are these people doing. But you see that there is, in total, an increase in deforestation, so there must be something going on. So in a sense, it's economics like a forensic science, like a detective science. You are trying to you are looking at the data and you are seeing something is happening there. You don't know exactly why, but you are trying to figure. So what we are going to do in the future is basically to try to identify what could be going on, what is the story behind it. So right now it's just a hunch. It's like really like, the detective story, it's an expectation. Okay, there must be something going on. But how exactly it's being done, I cannot tell you yet because we don't know. So most likely it's a combination of a lot of different incentives. It's a combination of a lot of different decisions that lead to more deforestation happening, but which decision is the most important? That's something that you can just analyze if you know this, exactly what types of decisions are being taken. If you look now by crop, and that's the last major result that I'm showing you. If you look by different agricultural crops, again, they are listed by decreasing importance. So at the very top, the most important one, palm oil, and after that, less and less important ones. You see that this interaction for indirect elections is very, very imprecisely estimated, very large confidence intervals, very long blue lines, and basically it looks like a zero. So there is nothing that makes a difference from a zero effect. So again, it shows you it's not only palm oil, it's all the crops. They're somehow not linked with these indirect elections. But if you look at direct elections, that's the next picture, you see much, much more tightly estimated, much shorter blue lines, so much more tightly estimated confidence intervals, and especially for the upper half of the picture. So I have shown you the palm oil interaction up there. It was the first one. But if you go down and you look at rubber, maize almost, cassava not, but groundnut as well. So if you look at these top commodities, you see that then their prices are improving. And we are just in the pre-election year. There is going to be more deforestation in those districts that are the best suited for producing these goods. So in a sense, it also shows you that palm oil may be not so different from all the rest. So major agricultural crops seem to be mostly positively linked with deforestation. But what you also see is as the importance of these crops decreasing, this positive effect is getting lost. So for one or two of them, at the bottom, banana, cacao, actually it goes into the other direction. So this could be something different happening with banana, cacao, or it could be also, so it could be because there's a different intensity of labor, for instance. So they are much less produced on large scale plantations, much more likely to be very labor intensive small scale production. But it could also be just additional noise somewhere down the line. So what we prefer to interpret are the top crops, the most important ones, where you really see a very clear positive relationship between political incentives and economic incentives. And the last type of test that I'm going to show you is basically how do these effects depend on which types of districts we are looking at. So what you see here horizontally is what share of a district is covered by forest at the very beginning of the sample period, so in 2000. So including Jakarta or including the district around Bogor would be at 0. So that's basically at the point 0, it's if you are including all the districts. When you are at point 0.9, it means 90% of the district area must have been covered by forest at the beginning. So by that, you are just picking a much smaller subset of Indonesian districts, those that were basically covered almost entirely by forest. And so now we are showing you different types of coefficients for different samples. So the first one is just full Indonesia. The last one is a small set of very highly forested areas. And what you see is that prices, again, it's just palm oil, prices matter everywhere. So when palm oil prices are increasing, you see increases in deforestation in the most forested regions, especially if they are well suited for palm oil production, as well as in the total sample. But if you now start looking at the role of direct elections, then you see actually a change in coefficients. So direct elections in themselves are linked to an increase on average in deforestation in the full Indonesian sample, but not so much in just the most forested areas. So in a sense, if you are looking at Indonesia as a total, yeah, there you see a clear link between just electoral cycle and elections happening and deforestation on average happening. Oh, sorry, I'm pushing a button that I shouldn't. So you see positive effects, much larger positive effects for full Indonesia than if you're just looking at the most forested municipalities. But then if you look at the interaction, the one thing that we were interested most in, so that's basically how political incentives get stronger when economic incentive or amplified when the economy is, economic incentives are also improving, or how economic incentives are amplified when politics plays a role. This is actually something that affects the most forested regions, the most forested areas. So it shows you that prices matter, direct election on average matter, but direct elections increase the importance of prices, especially in the most densely forested areas. So in the most densely forested areas, elections are going only to matter when the price incentives are right. So on average here, elections do not matter. Elections matter then when the economy also plays a role.
Do they do this deforestation after they are elected or before they are elected?
That's a very good question. Do they deforest after or before elections? This difference is always before elections and just in the year before elections. So basically, it's not that you are giving out favors after you got elected. It's rather when there is an election upcoming, politicians want to signal their competence, their willingness to help local development. And so there is a very large literature, not only on Indonesia, but globally, that shows you that especially before elections, politicians do a lot of different things in order to convince local populations that they are making good economic decisions. And these good economic decisions mean that they are making their constituencies potentially more prosperous. It could be helping, on average, many people, or it could also be just helping some selected people who are going to be very influential because they are funding your re-election campaign, because they are helping you to get re-elected, or helping your successor to get re-elected, or to get elected, or your preferred candidates. So since mayors cannot serve for more than two terms, it could be that they are already helping the next person whom they prefer to come into office. So here we don't know exactly what's going on, right? That's, as I said, it's really like detective science in a sense. Just to look at, we know from an economic perspective, from economic policy or political economy, that these incentives are the largest before elections. So before elections, there is a lot of handouts, there is a lot of help to local population in order to show, yes, I care. After elections, the politician doesn't have to show that he cares anymore, so then or it doesn't, of course, so it's not a normative statement I'm making. So it's not that I'm saying the politicians shouldn't care. I just say that the politician doesn't feel a very strict constraint anymore to show very quickly that he really is potentially a good type of politician, potentially a good guy who can help the local development a lot. So this is something that is happening just the year before elections, and that's what you also see. So I'm not going to repeat once again, but basically what we are finding, or until now, is economics and politics matter, and they go hand in hand, and they reinforce each other. So politics matters, but it matters most then when the economic incentives are also right. Economics matters, but it matters most then when political interest is also there, so that, or it matters more when politicians also feel an incentive to actually help land conversion. And what we want to do in the future, we want to look much more at about what types of policies are changing. Because on that we know at the moment very little. So what is happening actually? So is it concessions? Is it licenses? Is it illegal deforestation? We are going to look at forest fires in the next step. So that's something we are preparing. So is it, or is it just agricultural subsidies that are being drawn into a region? Is it some fiscal subsidies that are being drawn into a region? And that's what is promoting land conversion. That was from my part. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll be very happy to take additional questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Krisztina. Welcome, Pak Haris Gunawan. Pak Haris Gunawan is the Deputy of Peatland Restoration Agency. It's very important agency, just established under Jokowi's government, and this agency really has a big task to reduce the forest fire as well as deforestation. I know Pak Haris Gunawan, he is committed and he worked very hard to tackle this issue. Welcome, Pak Haris. Dr. Haris Gunawan actually is also a lecturer from Rio University. And Pak Professor Parulian, welcome also. Dr. Lukman Baga, as Vice Dean, and all the participants. Now we are going to have a discussion. Prof. Parulian, do you want to have some thought related to the topic? Or maybe another? Yeah. And please, if you have any other question.
Okay. Baik, terima kasih Pak Nunung. Thank you very much for your presentation. But actually I'm really surprised over your finding. The connection of deforestation with election. Election. Let's see the evidence. Yeah, you are right that deforestation is growing up here and more and more. But I'm not sure if I still in doubt whether this is connected to election. Because so far I understand, I know, there is no yet case that had been bring by KPK, Indonesian anti-corruption yet. But according to your finding, your study should be already happened so many, but nothing already catch by KPK. Why? That's one. I understand the point that because the politician need money, so they try to get money by whatever. One thing is about selling the permission of deforesting, cutting forest, something like that, for agriculture or like plantation, something like that. But as far as I understand, the way of people making cut forests illegally, extend their plantation in most cases, it's not by illegal permission. Cut first and then ask permission. That's a different thing. Yeah, I think. So I think you are right, but I thought you need more logical argument and evidence to convince us about your finding. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point. Thank you. So what I'm showing you, so it's also a beginning of a project. So we have been working on it for a couple of months. What I'm showing you is evidence that it is there. So it's again, as I said, it's like a detective science in that sense, so that you see there is something that is going up before elections without knowing exactly what's happening. There is a huge difference between Indonesia and Brazil, for instance. We were looking at deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon context. And there, almost all deforestation is illegal. So there, when deforestation is happening, you know that something bad, like something corruption or something violation of law is happening to a very large extent. Whereas in Indonesia, that wasn't the case over the 2000s because permissions could be sold and granted even without corruption. So the first step is that districts, after decentralization, they could make the decision officially and without any KPK need for their involvement. They could make this decision: we are going to sell more permits because now there is, so we are going to help more conversion activity. So by that, this result doesn't have to be driven by corruption, but you are also right also in your second statement to say there is also a lot of illegal activities happening. And that's also something, and you are absolutely right, that we should understand what's going on. And I think one point is that we want to investigate forest fires especially, because forest fires are much more likely to be linked to illegal activity. Forest fires are not necessarily, are unlikely to be driven by receiving a permit and then you are burning the forest. That's when you are cutting trees. But if you are trying to deforest illegally, it could really be also linked to fire activity. And that's the next step that we would like to understand and we like to link, is to see whether we see an increase in forest fires just before elections. Because if yes, then this gives you an indication. Again, it's not a proof, but it gives you an indication that something may be going on. And I think in this type of study, there is no proof whatsoever. So it's, we are not working for the KPK. But what we can do is we can observe statistically that something is happening, and then we can try to link it to different policy instruments to try to understand, could this policy be responsible for it? And there I'm also very much inviting your input. It would be very interesting to see your thoughts about it, to listen to your thoughts about it. What else could be happening? So what are different policy mechanisms that could be at play? It could go through the formation of natural reserves. So for instance, that a location is not going to embark on a formation of a natural reserve just before elections because it's just too costly. It just antagonizes some local players, and you are not going to do that. So before elections, you are not going to put additional protection areas up. It's more likely that you are actually, before elections, you are going to give out concessions, and they can be legal. What else can be happening before elections? It could be that you are trying to get central funds, additional funds for agriculture, trying to get subsidized credit for agriculture. Again, it's not illegal, but you as a politician may want to signal your special competence by pushing up these activities just before elections so that people notice that that's something that is benefiting them, that's something that's helpful. But you are absolutely right in a sense. It's not enough to see this coefficient. That's not the whole story. It just shows you and gives you an indication something must be going on. We don't know yet what. never been the case because that's what, so for that we would have to also look up the laws because everything I have read before, so at the beginning of 2000s at least, there was really local districts still had right to sell concessions. So by now I don't know whether there has been a policy change and we would have to, 2000, 2009. So
I think for concession in the beginning, maybe Pak Haris could also add from the policy perspective. In the beginning, I think head of district has a right to uh, to 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 issue concession. It is right, Pak. Yeah, but now government changed, yes, in 2009 that the right for concession now is under control of central government. In the beginning, yes, the district the head of district has a right to issue concession.
by that, the expectation would, again, the expectation would be that in the early years, before 2009, this doesn't have to be corruption linked. Later on, it is more likely to actually be illegal. So it could be that. So if it's the ministry that can just give this concession, of course the Bupati cannot influence the ministry very easily. So I think that's much harder for a Bupati to make the ministry officials decide in his favor than taking the direct decision. So I think there is, of course, then a difference over time.
Thank you. This is such an interesting research. You see relationship between deforestation and political situation in Indonesia. So it could be concluded here that deforestation happened to cover political costs of calon bupati and calon wali kota in an area. But how the modus operandi? Because I still hard to understand. It could be understood that after a wali kota or bupati elected, they could do power abuse to make this deforestation happen. But how about before election?
That's a great question. Thank you. How can a bupati wali kota abuse his power before elections? Before elections, there is someone else in power, and this someone else has exactly these incentives. So whoever is in power has the incentives to, if he can be reelected or she can be reelected, then to actually already invest into this election campaign. If the person has to leave office, incentives are a bit smaller, but still this person may have a preferred candidate, a preferred successor, whom this person can be helping on. So whoever is in office still may participate in elections, and that would be also, you are, in a sense, that's also a right hunch that there are differences. So if I'm rerunning personally, so then my incentives are much larger to actually abuse my power than if it's not me, but maybe my so if it's my vice mayor or someone else whom I know who's going to run. So there you are right that the direct personal incentives for a politician are much larger if this person is actually involved in elections. So what you see here is just an average effect across all people. Some of them are running, others are not running. But of course, what would be also interesting to see is whether those people who are rerunning, whether there this effect is larger. So for those, this is larger than for those who are personally not.
Any, yeah, please.
Well, thank you very much. It is interesting research. You mentioned that the data for deforestation come from Hansen et al. So I didn't reach the Hansen, but is that deforestation means that all for deforestation? I mean, yes, as you mentioned, there is a legal deforestation, and then what is legal or deforestation means that you have a concession, then you have a right to deforest. Yeah. do they have do you have this kind of data? If you have it will be interesting to differentiate legal and illegal deforestation. Yeah, and the second one is using related to the lady's questions. Yeah, it is possible after you elected, the deforestation came from after you elect. Yeah, yeah, you abuse your power by, for example, permit using these permits to the other to your supporters, yeah, financial supporters, for example, yeah, and the model might be changed, not from lack, but from later on, future. And also, I was wondering about what is it? Non agriculture products. Yeah, non agriculture product as a factor to deforestation. Yeah, I don't know in developing countries such as Indonesia or Brazil. Yeah, it is commonly come from agricultural product. But what about in Europe? I think Europe also has deforestation. I don't know you you have this data or not, but sometimes I don't know. Just to know if there is deforestation, it is always the uh, agriculture product because of agriculture product or something else, not only agriculture products. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor. So great questions again. Thanks. Just remind me, I have, okay, your first question is about legal, illegal, and whether concessions. So in a sense, what we are measuring is satellite-based forest loss, right? By that, it's legal, illegal, everything taken together. You are absolutely, so it's just measuring those pixels that are losing their greenness and forest cover. So there you see that they have now fewer trees than 30% of their coverage, and before that they had more than 30%. So a cell is passing a threshold, and by that it's being counted as deforested. But you are absolutely right that actually in order to know how much of it this is legal and illegal, you would have to look at concession data. So that's something that we are very much interested in, is actually to look at concessions and to understand how is it linked to yearly variation in how much concessions are being given out. And as you developed this idea just a couple of minutes ago together, this is going to be, my expectation would be that this should be more linked to concessions before 2009, when the local politician could actually make this decision themselves, than after 2009, when the ministry in the center, the Ministry of Forestry, is giving out this concession, for instance. So of course, yes, of course, it could be possible. The second point that you raised, that the model may be wrong by looking at, so it's not before elections but after elections. What you see is here, it's the full picture before elections, after elections. So in a sense, we are not building a model by thinking hard about it and then making a decision how it should be. We are looking at the data and trying to figure how is it in actual terms. And what you see is that's election year, that's the year after elections, 2 years after elections, that's 1 year before elections, that's 2 years before elections. And what you see is that the 1 year before elections, there is something very big happening. It doesn't mean that people do not abuse power otherwise. So it's just a comparison. It just shows you that there is more deforestation happening in the pre-election year than in other years. It could be that local abuses of power are linked to deforestation anyway, but that's not what we are looking at statistically. We are just looking at the difference, the differential effect. And there you see that it may be that politicians are actually someone is becoming a mayor and giving out extra licenses. That would be here and here. But what is happening more is in the year before elections, there is more deforestation in the year before elections. So that's the one thing that we are able to identify. And to your third question, also a quite interesting one, is on, first of all, comparison with Western Europe, Germany. It's not only agriculture conversion. Most of the deforestation is happening in tropical areas around the world right now. Or why? Because in Germany or in Western Europe, forest is already stable. So deforestation was happening hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It was very massive, but it's over. So by now there is already almost a reforestation. So forest is slightly growing in some countries, but it's at a relatively low level. So at least in Germany, forest coverage is of course much lower, but there is a managed forest. It's highly illegal to deforest, and illegal deforestation is not happening anymore. So in many Western countries, that's not an issue anymore. Whereas in developing countries, or like in Indonesia, in Brazil, in these quickly emerging economies, land conversion is a major issue. And you are very absolutely right in your point, saying that land conversion could mean conversion into industrial activity. We were discussing with Panunung, land conversion could also be driven by buildings and cities growing, and basically just completely different type of arrangement. So it's not for agriculture, but just for building roads and schools and new housing. Or it could be driven by agriculture. And I think right now in Indonesia, agriculture does play a very important role, and that's also what we are seeing in the data. But in this older study that I was referring to by Burgess and Olken and others, they were looking also at an interaction, but with oil price, with access to oil. So those districts that have oil revenues are engaging less in this pre-election manipulation because they have other revenues to actually get access to before elections. So what they were showing, or the idea was that they don't, a Bupati, Valikota doesn't need deforestation as much if there is a completely different type of resource to be tapped. So for political reasons, you are going to use the forest if that's your major resource. If you have something else very important in terms of resources, then you may not end up increasing deforestation as well because you have something else to exploit as a resource. So I think that's also a very important point that you are making.
Thank you for the nice presentation. But can you help me? Okay. Yeah. Just wondering to the model that here you include agricultural price variables, right? But I don't see that prices from the wood industry. Yeah, wood prices. You don't include it, or you have already?
Try to sell off a couple of highly expensive trees. And that's also something that is happening still in Indonesia, that some of the timber is very valuable, and so it can be also cut. Why we are not doing that is coming a bit from the economic type of specification. So we are not focusing on it because we don't have this type of nice geographic variation in suitability that we have here. So where you say, okay, agricultural crops and agricultural production districts are very differently suitable for this production, and by that are differently responding to prices. It cannot be identically, so we cannot identically measure the incentive to just cut down a couple of trees. What we know, so that's also how Indonesia may be a bit different also from Brazil. That's again, Elias could also say more in that in Brazil, there is very little cutting the trees, and it's mostly slashing, burning. So it's not because of the economic value of the trees, but rather because of the economic value of the land. In Indonesia, there is, at times, trees do matter also a bit, but land also matters a lot, I think, because this is really, in a sense, it's a long-term decision and an irreversible decision. So once you have cut down tropical forest, there is no tropical forest coming after that. So you can have some other plantations and forest plantations, but you're not going to have a tropical forest anymore.
Morning, Professor. Thank you for the presentation. I want to ask about the focus on the political. Like, we can conclude that election combined price incentive increase may drive more deforestation, like that, yeah. Is there any possibility that in large scale of deforestation, there is a negative effect from deforestation to the winning chance in election, and makes the conclusion about deforestation become paradox to the success of election? Because economic incentive is not really profitable to the major of people like voting, like that.
It's an interesting point that you are raising, and that's something we cannot tell you a lot about, is basically the question, is deforestation something that may be bad for re-election? And what you may have in mind behind it is that local population is at times is not pro-deforestation. So there are parts of the, it's an issue of distribution. It's an issue of distribution of local benefits. It could be that from deforestation, the question is who benefits from deforestation. So benefits could be spread relatively broadly if a lot of smallholders are getting access to land, or benefits could be very, very concentrated if it is a big concession company that is setting up a large plantation. And even then, it depends on how much labor they are going to employ, right? So it depends on if they are now going to be the major employer locally, local population may still prefer that actually to something else. So it really depends on who is exactly benefiting. But I think that's a very important question, but it's something that is very hard to pinpoint based on something this aggregate as we are looking at right now. So for that, you would really somehow need to look at more income distribution type of outcomes. So almost like go into socioeconomic surveys and try to see how is deforestation linked to income distribution and how many people do benefit on average from land conversion. It could be very few, it could be also a lot, and we don't know exactly, but I think you are very right pinpointing that it's an extremely important question to understand.
I'm just curious. How do you measure deforestation? And where do you get the information? Can you tell us?
Yes, of course. So I was just citing a source, but I can also explain how it's coming about, where it's coming from. It's based on a global database, so it's not ministry information, it's not Indonesian policy information. It's based on satellite imagery. So it's natural scientists. So this data set I was referring to, the Hansen data set, it's a long number of names, many names published this global source for deforestation data. What they are basically doing, they are taking satellite images, many satellite images over a year. They are cleaning them of cloud coverage, because that's of course tricky, because clouds are white and under the clouds you don't see deforestation. So they are trying to identify observations and measurements when no clouds were present. And then they are trying to come up with a pixel for each year. So basically you have, pixels are here 30 meters times 30 meters, so it's a small square observed from space. And you have a yearly measure on all these squares, and you know how green they are. By that, you have an assessment of how many trees are on those areas. So basically, it's an assessment from satellite images, how dense a tree cover is there, and it's there is a tricky measurement issue behind it. So, because if there are,
No, I don't need detail.
sure.
But what I'm saying is this. Why do you convince that all this deforestation is related to agriculture development, like production of maize and palm oil and so on? In fact, in Indonesia, mostly deforestation because of mining, illegal mining and so on. How do you distinguish that two kind of economic activity?
Okay, again, you are absolutely right. So mining will play a role. I think mining plays a much more geographically concentrated role, though. So if you look at these figures on, or where deforestation was happening, deforestation is happening on large parts of Sumatra and Kalimantan, whereas mining is much more focused in certain areas. But in some areas, mining is going to play a very big role. How we say at the moment we are not considering mining at all, so we are not controlling for it. How can we distinguish? How can we know that this is prices and not mining? If it were mining, it would mean that mining should be concentrated at the same places where palm oil can be well produced. So for instance, when we are looking at palm oil production and we are looking at here saying which district is more suitable for palm oil, we would get wrong results if the greenest districts are always the ones that are also mining, and the mining prices go together with palm oil prices, which is almost too much coincidence. So statistically, we can distinguish this because it's very unlikely that the mining locations are going to be the good soil, good palm oil soil locations, or the good maize soil locations. Because that mining is just driven by something else. So mining is distributed in space as well, but not the same way as the topsoil is distributed in Indonesia. But you are raising a very important point that additionally, on the top of this, so I don't think that these results are wrong because mining is somehow compounding them. But on the top of this, it would be very interesting to see what is the relative contribution of mining versus agriculture. That's something we are not doing here, but that's something that could be considered, and there is data on different discovered major what's the right word? Major minerals, so like mineral wealth. There is some data, there are maps on mineral wealth, and this is actually a very good idea that you're proposing to say, look at the geographical distribution of mineral wealth and try to see how much of this is, how much of the deforestation is driven actually by the mining decisions and by the mining activity. And this could be compared to how much of it is agriculture. My personal feeling is that the broad picture, the broad coverage is more likely to link to agriculture just because agricultural suitability is much larger than the availability of central minerals. But central minerals are going to matter in hotspots, in certain locations a lot. So you're absolutely right. If you want to understand deforestation on Irian Jaya, you have to think about mining. Because there it's really, certainly, large-scale mining that is contributing to deforestation a lot.
As I thought, I would suggest that you try to verify
absolutely.
this information. And the second point, I wonder that you try to see the relation, connection of price trend and deforestation. Well, I thought some of these commodities, or maybe all these commodities, they don't have a single trend of price, but fluctuated trend. Like that.
Yeah.
But how can people make decisions based on price while the price is not relatively unpredictable? To opening the forest, yes, this may be legal or legal, but you should look at that when opening forest, the people that opening forest must invest a lot of money. Maybe it takes a lot of time to recover this investment. How they can dare to invest a big of money with price trend uncertainty? Thank you.
Absolutely. Again, thank you. A very important point that you are raising, basically, and I think the only image in our mind that we need for this to work is that people, as you say, they have imperfect foresight. They don't know what's going to happen. So how we are modeling it is basically, if you are looking at this, you are in this year, you have prices that are relatively high. How we are constructing our price incentive is basically a comparison between this price and what was happening before the 10 years before or 5 years before. Because by that you can think people were observing palm oil prices for a while and now they see there is a bonanza. When to respond if not now? So it's very hard to predict what's going to happen, you are right. But in a sense, your thinking and your economic thinking and your economic incentives, when you see until now prices have been sort of stable, even declining, but now there is such a large increase. Maybe this is really the right point of starting thinking about investing. So in a sense, our idea of economic decision making is that agricultural players, when they observe large deviations from what they used to see before that, then actually think, okay, now it looks like it may be more profitable. How do they can do this is actually a good question. And I think part of the story could be also an interesting link to subsidized credit, for instance. If they are managing to get access to agricultural credit, that could be an option to finance it, but we don't know, right? We just see deforestation happening. We don't know at the moment how how agricultural conversion is being financed. So we just see a correlation between agricultural incentives going up and deforestation going up. It's clear that deforestation is not driving these agricultural incentives, but we don't know. Like in a sense, we are lacking the steps. Who is making which decisions? So you see aggregate changes, you see aggregate outcomes, but we don't see individual decisions, how people decide, am I going to now invest into new, let's say a new palm oil plantation? Am I going to set up a new palm oil plantation? The only thing that we're thinking is that setting up a new palm oil plantation in this year seems like a better idea than after prices went down so much. So that's, I think, the only economic motivation.
Could be that big investor that make some kind of decision. But in fact, in Indonesia, a lot of deforestation also related to small farmer or poor farmer who cannot afford to make such big investment and endure the loss whenever the price is down.
Absolutely, but in a sense, what you're seeing is an overall match in the patterns. So you see that whoever is behaving this way, a big investor can make this decision, but on the small margin, even a small player can think, okay, it looks like palm oil is getting such a good business that actually now we are going to start a cooperative, or we are going to start a small scale production because, or we are deciding what to do, and actually it looks like palm oil is getting a better idea. Or after a while, it looks like palm oil is getting not such a good idea. So I think on the margin, even very small players are making decisions. It's not like they may not be able to enter the market. You're absolutely right. But if they are deciding to set up a small plantation or to start producing in their backyard, again, they are responding to prices as every economic participant. So in a sense, what we are seeing is an aggregate response.
Yeah, I agree with your point, but this is the case of deforestation.
Yeah.
People decide to cut the forest for develop expansion of like kebun or whatsoever, like that. But small farmers, I don't think the small farmer can make such decision. But in fact, deforestation is mostly about the small farmer.
Yeah. We don't know, right? We don't know. In a sense, we just have a gut feeling, but we don't have very precise evidence to know who is actually doing this.
What I'm saying is this. My suggestion is, okay, this is good study. Okay, of course, from the satellite information, something like that. And that study guide you to go deeper, to look at in the field, in my opinion, to check whether that this really happen in the field. But certainly, this is very useful to direct your study to find out what's the real happen in the field, rather than, okay, thanks.
Of course, we have a lot of evidence from the field, not mine, but my colleagues. So from the agricultural faculty in Göttingen, they've been looking at Jambi. So this project is on Jambi. The project we are part of, so our joint project is on Jambi. And they were looking at individual decisions. And they have studies, very small scale, where they are looking at how land conversion is happening. And they are finding basically the same, that palm oil prices, conversion from rubber to palm oil is driven by prices. So they are finding it at a very small scale as well. So I don't know what is happening, and that's something that you don't learn from a large scale study. You can, or from a small scale study, you don't know whether these results on a couple of farmers or a couple of thousand farmers in Jambi are actually what's going on in Indonesia as a total. So where such a study can help is to say, okay, let's look at what is going on in Indonesia as a total. But locally, my colleagues have done exactly that. So they have asked households and farmers and decisions, and they see exactly this link between palm oil prices are driving palm oil conversion. So there has been a very large expansion of palm oil areas, not only large scale, also small scale over this time. And that people respond to price incentives, that's something that small scale studies have also established there. You are absolutely right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Arlian. Have 10 minutes. Actually, this study is interesting, particularly when we see that the environmental problem driven by economic incentive and then political aspect, because the study trying to looking at and connecting the election process. So we still have to go further related to the, maybe we can have a small study or in-depth interview, something like to to make this study more sound. And I mean, this is a good study because basically the political process actually is one of the driver of the environmental problem. Uh, we, we, we can see from the number of head of district that already being suspect or even goes into the jail, that KPK is responsible dealing with corruption. And another important thing, maybe Pak Aris Gunawan will point it out, because uh, I don't know if it is possible, Krisztina, to looking at the the location of deforestation, because peatland area is also important for the oil palm, where Pak Haris now is really concerned how to conserve our peatland area, where peatland area, many peatland area in Indonesia now uh, is converted into oil palm. One side that oil palm is growing, but we really, and international community also put attention how to conserve our peatland. And also during peatland restoration agency established, the forest fire uh, decreased quite a lot. So this is because of VRG work hard how to stop forest fire. And maybe Pak Haris, would you like to give some comment related to this study, or maybe additional?
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, Pak Dr. Nunung. He is my old friend, and of course, we would like to say welcome to Indonesia to Prof. Krisztina and your college. Uh, I just want to also make some, how I can say, appreciate about your study. And of course, this is the scientific working, and then we need to listen more about the future, this study, and then we are thinking the impact of this study also make a better about the Indonesian political and environment. That's we hope, and then so it is good challenge and good opportunities to make how can I say that a more strong cooperation research cooperation with Indonesian research, research, yeah. That's my impression, first impression. And the second, I want to clarify and adding the Pak Nunung information because we would we would like to worry about the statement that the decreasing of the fire spot and hotspot because the BRG working, Wetland Restoration Agency working. I'm worried about that, and so I just want to adding Pak Nunung information that the decreasing of fire spot and hotspot in Indonesia due to the strong commitment of the Indonesian many stakeholder, and then one of them because the President Jokowi establishing the Peatland Restoration Agency. It's small agency, it's not big agency. That's my clarification. And then third, I want to also invite the possible to deep study on the peatland. Yeah, because in the global, international community, and then Indonesia right now, very give attention about this ecosystem because as you know that the ecosystem is very important for the global climate change and other ecological or environmental services, and also economic and also politics. So we possible to invite you to cooperation of the research. And the last, this is I think I want to clarify. I just want to know the impact of the study, as I mentioned before, that will be hopefully make more better the Indonesian politics. I mean that the system, the political system of Indonesia. As if you study about the politics and economy and the environment in Indonesia, so very we hope and waiting the motive about the what what kind of the party that they contribute better for the agriculture price and then also environment, as like from your study can educate the Indonesian community that this is good party, something like that. And I think I want to wait your comment about this. In my experience, some agriculture crop will be influenced for the election. If the election happen, so the price of crop will be decreasing in some commodity. I think also this is just adding information. I think thank you, Pak Nunung, for these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Faris. Thanks. To your point on the peatland areas, absolutely. I'm absolutely with you. So I think it's very, very interesting to, and that's also a next step that we would like to make, is to understand where is deforestation located. So to make more, to look at different types of forests being lost. We can classify different types of forests and also know the location of peatland areas. So that would be something that we could very easily provide you with this information. We'd be very happy to also provide you with more specific information exactly on peatland areas. In terms of what do policymakers and what do we learn and what does the public learn, you are absolutely right. So here we are not looking at yet at partisanship. And the partisanship of local politicians is really a very complex issue, I say. So there are a lot of parties, and also the party lines are at times very blurred. So at least at the local level, political scientists find often that there is very little sticking to party lines. So people are getting on a party ticket, but then they are not so closely linked to the party at this local level. So in the DPRD, for instance, politicians form very different coalitions and change very much their allegiances. So Golkar is Golkar, you're right. There are a lot of small parties where people are actually very easy, so it's much more fluid. So I think it's for us also harder to say this is a good environmental party, this is less. But I think it would be a very interesting thing. So I have some colleagues who have very good information on the whole partisan um, party composition of DPRDs and similar. So that would be interesting thing to analyze and correlate, because I'm absolutely certain that there are some party patterns as well. That's also something that you are suggesting. On average, what do we learn from this? In a sense, what can environmental policymakers learn from this to see that there are these incentives before elections? If you are thinking about monitoring, if you are thinking about where to focus monitoring activities, then the piece of information here is that think about the electoral cycle. So if look especially at those places if you want to monitor behavior, or if you want to that are getting closer to elections, because that's something that has been happening in Indonesia for 15 years by now, from the beginning of 2000s, that elections do seem to matter. And since local elections are so much spread in space, that's a very easy information for a monitoring agency also to consider, to think, okay, this part of the country, these districts, or these bupatis and balikotas are up for re-election. Let's keep it in mind when we are thinking about where do we expect the most activities happening. So I think, in a sense, that's something very practical, where you can think of if elections seem to matter, and statistically they seem to matter, and it really looks like when an election is upcoming, deforestation is going up. So we can also target them and try to monitor and try to keep at least the illegal part of it down, which I think could be an entry to policymaking. So we worked together in a different Brazilian context, for instance, to look at whether fining, so environmental fines, how do they contribute to decreases in deforestation? So whether the environmental police agency, I don't know how it is in Indonesia, I have not read much about it, have not seen much. How much is actually the Ministry of Forestry, how much fining activities are there? So is there already a monitoring in place where agents are going to the field and are trying to stop illegal deforestation? Can you maybe comment on that shortly? Because I think that's, for us, very interesting, and I haven't seen much on that in Indonesia. So I know that in Brazil, the environmental agency, IBAMA, is extremely present. They are monitoring hotspots, and they are sending their officials to the hotspots to confiscate cattle and to confiscate assets to basically stop illegal deforesters. Are there initiatives in Indonesia, or is there any environmental interventions where monitoring is brought to the field?
Yeah, I think so that especially in Pak Jokowi era, I'm not campaign here, but of course the Pak Jokowi era continue the policy of moratorium. And then also right now, just a few months ago, that Pak Jokowi also signed the oil palm moratorium. And then for the minister, that FAO meeting in France, that also announcement that deforestation right now getting decreased. So I think this is it sounds good for us, for the global society. And then, of course, still many homework, yeah, especially on the field, yeah, on the ground, yeah. 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 Yeah, I think that the central government right now may make a strong message that for that issue they cannot do by themselves. So they try to coordinate and, of course, invite as many as stakeholders for contribute this achievement. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Dear participant, because time constraint, actually, I would like first to put a note that how humble Pak Haris. If we follow Pak Haris Instagram and FB, he is very active from one region to another region, flying from one region to another region. I really know him. I really know him. How humble Pak Haris. Actually, uh, Pak Haris under PRG is really work hard because his mandate, one of his mandate is how to reduce or how to uh, tackle the issue of forest fire. Since the forest fire, our neighbor country complaining the haze and and quite in some years ago, forest fire is happening a lot. But now we can see from the number and evidence, and this is really decreased a lot. So that's why, Pak Aris, we try to put the forest fire issues into our study, and we do hope can collaborate further with Land Restoration Agency to get some data related to the forest fire because you monitor forest fire. And again, thanks a lot, Krisztina and Elias. This is still preliminary, and we will improve based on some comment and input from all of you. And we also want to present this result next week in the international conference. I don't know whether Pak Aris have a time to follow all international conference in Bali. This is related with the ecological transformation, but focus on Jambi and other and some study or macro study or international study. And again, we still also wait the final result of Professor Krisztina and Dr. Elias, and then we will see the implication or policy implication related to the study to Indonesia. And we believe that we will also share all the study into stakeholder in Indonesia. Again, thank you very much. At least we can see the interaction, as I mentioned before, environment, economics, and politics. Some studies already conducting related to the political issues on environmental, but this is on a small scale. And this study really want to see the big picture, what's happening, the deforestation driven by economic and political aspect. We give a big applause for Professor Krisztina and Elias. Uh, Last but not least, we will give a token to both of you. Like, so I'm also multi-agent as a moderator and also person who will give this present to Krisztina. This is our Bogor Agriculture University. Our motto is searching and serving the best. So that's why we invite the best people to come, because searching the best people to give a lecture and talk. Thank you very much. And this is again not just only uh, the last opportunity for us to discuss. Next year, I hope Krisztina and Elias will come again to give another talk and then another uh, research result. And we also invite some students, if you interest, you can join for the research. Thank you very much, and good luck for you both. And again, thank you very much. Terima kasih.